Hello, my name is Michelle St. John. I'm the Public Policy and Marketing Coordinator for Northern Human Services. I'll be your host as we walk through the legislative process and go over some vocabulary and terminology used in the general court. And if you pause a moment, I will be sharing my screen. So tonight we will go through the legislative terms and vocabulary and review the legislative process on how a bill becomes law. We'll start off with defining what the general court is. The general court is the term that the New Hampshire government uses for its legislative branch. It's comprised of the House of Representatives and the Senate. There are 424 legislators. There's 400 representatives and 24 senators. Our legislative session runs from January to June each year, with some additional activity over the summer and fall. Legislators are elected and serve for 2-year terms. Biennium. Biennium is the word that we use to cover the 2-year period of time of the legislature. The governor, executive council, senators, and representatives are all elected to serve a single biennium. The first year of a biennium for the New Hampshire General Court is also known as a budget year. The New Hampshire state budget is also on a biennium cycle, which is called the biennium budget. A legislative service request, or which is commonly known as an LSR, is a filing made by a legislator for a proposed bill. An LSR is submitted to the Office of Legislative Services and is comprised only of a title and the name of the prime sponsor. A bill is a piece of proposed legislation under consideration by the legislators. Bills are referred to by their number and the originating legislative body, for example, HB, House Bill, or HB 100. Standing committee. You'll hear the term committee used, such as the Health and Human Services and Elderly Affairs Committee, as a standing policy committee, or we call it a committee. It's a subset of legislators who are appointed by the House Speaker or Senate President. There are standing committees in both the House and the Senate. The standing policy committees are each responsible for a specific subject matter, such as health and human services or education, transportation, criminal justice, finance, ways and means, etc. Each committee holds public hearings on all bills assigned to it, considers the subject matter, and then they make recommendations on the disposition of those bills to the full legislative body. Public hearing. A public hearing is the purpose of a public hearing is to provide testimony and information to the standing committee. Members of the general public, lobbyists, state agency staff, and legislators may all provide testimony during a public hearing. The term remote sign-in online testimony. The option to provide a remote sign-in or submit testimony online was established in the 2021 biennium as a result of COVID. So, any member of the public may complete the House sign-in form and online testimony through the General Court website. Submitting online testimony is not available for Senate hearings. However, both in the House and the Senate, an individual can go online through the General Court website and indicate whether or not they support or oppose the proposed legislation. An executive session. The executive session is part of a deliberation process for a bill once it has undergone a public hearing. Committee members meet and discuss testimony and the bill, and then makes a recommendation for a motion on the bill. A majority must be present in order to take action. The public may observe committees in executive sessions as they take their final vote on a bill. The next few terms are what are motions that are made for bills in the legislature. The first is called OTP, or ought to pass. This means that the committee supports the bill as written and no amendments were made to the bill. So the original intent and language that was drafted by the prime sponsor and potentially other stakeholders who contributed to the bill writing process remains intact as originally submitted. Inexpedient to legislate. This means that the committee does not support the bill, and an ITL essentially kills the bill. Ought to pass as amended. So this is also known as, you might see the symbols OTP-A. This means that the committee supports the bill with an amendment. The amendment may be submitted by the committee itself or the prime sponsor. Refer to interim study or interim study. This is a recommendation for a bill to be retained in committee for further study between legislative sessions. If this occurs in the second year of a biennium, the bill dies. If it occurs in the first year of the biennium, then a report will be filed and the legislative body will take up the bill at the beginning of the second session. So that covers the frequently used terms and abbreviations that we are covering this evening. And let's go on to the main event, which is how a bill becomes law. So we've used this graphic to help depict the process and the amount of time it might take to go through how a bill becomes a law. And the first thing it starts is from an idea. Anyone can have an idea. A member of the community can have an idea, a private citizen, a group, lobbyists, state agencies may have an idea, or even the governor. So you know, there's an idea of an item that wants to be passed. And so then what will happen is you need to find a prime sponsor for the bill. And the sponsor has to come from either the House of Representatives or a senator. And in our situation this evening, if we were to be looking at a legislative, an idea for a bill, the first step would be to contact your legislator in your community and say, call them up on the telephone, send an email saying, I have this idea that I'd like to discuss with you as a potential bill. This process usually takes place in when the legislature is not in session, but not necessarily. If you have an idea that you've been thinking about and it's halfway through the session and it's not an election year, you may contact your legislator or one of your legislators or all of your legislators and say, I have this idea that I'd like to talk to you about. And if they think it's a good idea and they'd like to work with you to get that bill, then your legislator would then connect with other stakeholders, potential agencies such as the community, members of the community, other interested parties and organizations, and say, if we put this bill on the table, what should be included? How should we word it? And these groups would then, work together with experts, potentially the agency corresponding to what that bill would fall under, such as Health and Human Services, and they would begin to draft the bill. Once the bill is drafted with the support from the Office of Legislative Services, the LSR, the sponsor then could say to his fellow legislators on the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, or independents, and say, I've got this bill that will create X for this group, and I would like to find some co-sponsors. And other legislators across the state who might have constituents with the same ideas, or who understands the needs for a particular bill, they might then sign on to that bill as co-sponsors. So once the prime sponsor has collected or recruited up to 10 individuals on the House and the Senate to be sponsors of the bill, and the language has been drafted and approved by the prime sponsor using a drafting attorney through the Office of Legislative Services, it is then signed off on and introduced and given a actual number. So that would correspond. So let's just say you were talking to a representative and not your senator, and they are the prime sponsor. So in that situation, it would be House bill, and it would get a number assigned based on kind of the hierarchy, the chronological acceptance of these bills, the readiness of the bills. So let's just give it a number, HB 207. And that would correspond to being House Bill 207. Once the bill is introduced and read through the, giving a first and second reading, it is assigned to a committee. And so we'll follow through on this and talk about the committee assignment being the Health and Human Services. So that bill is assigned to committee, and there is within the committee, there's a chair and a vice chair, and on the House side, there's a clerk, and on the Senate side, there's actually paid staff to work in that role. So then a date is assigned. Every bill that would be assigned to the committee would be given a date for a public hearing. And so in this case, let's just go with this bill that's going to create a fund to support recreational activities. This bill actually is in existence right now and has been sponsored by one of our legislators in our community in Grafton County. And that is Representative Stringham. And so then that bill would be assigned a public hearing date. And usually, depending on the bill and I don't want to say the popularity of the bill, but I will say the popularity of the bill, it could have as little as a 15-minute hearing and as long as a whole day. There are some bills, for example, the budget hearing could happen over 6 hours with testimony because that bill is so large, or something to do with, funding for Medicaid. That bill could take hours instead of minutes. But let's just say in this case, about up to 30 minutes has been provided in the schedule for that day for a public hearing. And so then the public hearing will take place, and anyone, legislators, private citizens, agencies, state agencies, representatives, lobbyists, can all come to the public hearing and either just sign a piece of paper saying, I'm here for the hearing, I represent myself, or in the case of a lobbyist, they indicate who they represent, and I support the bill or I don't support the bill. For those individuals who want to provide testimony, written testimony, they can speak. Generally, it's up to 3 minutes. And so they could sign this sheet to say that they'll sign in. And then there's the list. The committee will get this list of individuals. Let's say 10 people came to the hearing that want to speak in support or in oppose, and they'll approach the committee, introduce themselves, and indicate that they're here and speaking in support or in opposition of HB 600, and at that point then they would begin their remarks. It's At that point, it's a sharing of information. You might be providing facts, figures, your own personal story about why you support or don't support the bill as a private citizen. And then you could say that you're open to questions, or you could just thank them for the opportunity for providing testimony and that you're not taking questions. If you were open to questions, someone might ask you something specific about the piece of testimony that you gave. They might ask you to further explain your situation on why you support the bill. And that could happen. Several legislators on the committee might have questions, or none of the legislators have a question, and then they would thank you for your time. You could, it's encouraged to bring the number of copies that are comprised for one for each member of the committee. And you would then hand that to the clerk for the House, or to the administrative support staff, whoever's collecting that for the Senate. And then you would go back to your seat. And that process will go through. In some cases, there is a delay in the schedule because an unexpected amount of people came in support or against a bill, and the day has been delayed. And in some cases, a public hearing may get rescheduled to a later date. And in that case, they would reschedule the date and the whole process would start over again. In other situations, it could come later in the day. If you were scheduled for a public hearing at 10:30 and the previous bill took an hour instead of 30 minutes, then it would be 11:30 that they would start it. Or potentially they could be taking a break and then they'd start it up again after lunch, which is usually 1 p.m. And so once that process is done, the bill then, they continue to collect testimony up until midnight of the public hearing. And so you could still go provide testimony in person, but you could also go remotely to the website and go through the steps of selecting the committee, the bill, the date, the bill number, and whether you support or oppose that bill. There is an option in the House that you can actually then take your testimony that you've written and either type it directly into the website, or if you have it as a file, as a PDF or a Word file, you can upload that directly to the website. There is one thing to note about that. When you submit testimony online through the website, it becomes a public document and it is searchable. So when people are comprising their letters of their testimony, be cognizant of whatever you are putting is not, anyone can find that information. And it's just something to keep aware of as you're sharing your personal information. So once the public hearing is done and they've gathered all that information, people can follow up after by sending an email to the committee. They might add something, an email directly saying, please support, please don't. But they would have executive session. And at that point, they'd be sitting there talking about the testimony that came through, and looking at the bill and seeing, in the testimony that was provided, was it a good idea for a bill? Was it a good idea for a bill, but maybe with some changes because there are some unintended consequences as written, or there was something left out? So the bill could be amended, or they could say, this is just not a good bill. It's not ready to move ahead, or the content is, we don't support the bill as it's written or amended. And they could then say, we want to, what is called killing the bill through making a motion to inexpedient to legislate. Or another option can be that the bill is good, but it's not right. It's not ready. but they're not really ready to kill the bill. They would like to do some more research, talk to more experts, figure out, what those unintended consequences might be, and create and amend a report so the bill could come back in the second year of the biennium, and then be a motion could be made at that point. So that would be referring it to study and making a recommendation. And there could be several hearings at a later time where they would actually spend more time figuring out, is this bill worth saving? Can we save this bill? Can we amend this bill to move it forward? Or do we recommend killing it? So the majority of the committee must be available on that executive session for a vote to take place. And once that happens, representatives and senators have to have a replacement if they are not. If for some reason a legislator cannot make it the executive session, they let the Senate president or the House Speaker know, and they can assign someone to be in your absence to vote. So once that vote takes place and a recommendation has been made, then a member of the committee will write a report for what happened. And if it's a unanimous, they can recommend that the bill go on the consent calendar, which then it's just it's going to move forward. It's by a voice vote. They can, if there's dissent in, say it's a split vote and half the committee voted yes and half the committee voted no, there'll be two reports, one in the majority and one in the minority, and they'll show the number of how many in the committee voted that, and that is included in what is called the House or the Senate calendar, that report. And then the next step would be is when the very next House or Senate session takes place, full House or full Senate, that bill would then be on the docket and either ready for a floor debate because there was not unanimous support or unanimous opposition of the bill. And then the debate process could happen all over again of saying why this bill should pass or why the bill shouldn't pass, and then the full House will vote on it. Now, if a bill passes through as an ought to pass or an ought to pass as amended, it then moves over to go for crossover to the next chamber or legislative body. So in this case, if the bill started in the House of Representatives, it would then move to the Senate. Now, some bills are referred to a second committee, and the second committee it's usually for bills that have a financial or a fiscal note attached to it. So something that's going to cost the state money to implement. And once that happens, it goes, and it's referred to the second committee, then basically those steps happen all over again. The public hearing, the executive session, and a second floor vote. But this time, in the case of a fiscal note, it goes to the Finance Committee. And the Finance Committee can meet and discuss bills, and they also break it down within. There are, in a budget year, there are so many bills that they break it down into smaller groups where a bill could be heard that falls under a specific category. So once that's done, and let's just say the bill continues to move forward, maybe this time with an amendment, but everyone has voted, and crossover day, which usually happens in March, is a day when all bills have to be done in their originating body. If for whatever reason a bill was tabled or retained, or they ran out of time, which actually does happen, the bill dies. It does not, if it doesn't make it to crossover, the bill essentially is dead on the floor. So both the House and the Senate works diligently, usually sometimes late into the night, to make sure that all the bills that are on the calendar in multiple sessions in January and February and up until crossover day in March, that all of these bills get through. And depending on the year and the number of bills do get left, and they are killed. So the process will then start all over again, where all House bills that made it to crossover get moved to the Senate, and all bills in the Senate that make it to crossover move into the House. So and then the process starts all over again. They get introduced, a public hearing is scheduled, people come and testify in support or in opposition. An executive session will occur, an amendment might be made, and the committee will vote on that recommendation, and the bill then gets added to the calendar. And if it's unanimous, it goes on the consent calendar. If it requires further debate, it goes on the regular calendar, and all of that, and at that point, then the bill is voted on. It can be up to, I think it is like a fourth time, because you'll have to go back and forth, and the process goes through for financial notes. It has to go to Senate Finance again. So again, it goes through that whole process. And at some point, let's just say your bill that you've been following, or the bills that we've been following, several of them changed from when the House voted on it, on the floor vote, which is step 6, and when the Senate voted on it for a floor vote. And so what happens at that point is either the originating body reads that bill with the changes that the other body made and says, yes, we concur with those changes, we're okay with them, or they don't concur and they recommend a conference on this bill, where it means the two groups, a designated group from the House and a designated group from the Senate, will get together and discuss that bill and try to come up with a compromise. If they can come up with a compromise, then that bill will then go back through one more vote process and say, yes, here's the bill. We've made these changes, and the House agrees and the Senate agrees. If they cannot come up with an agreement, then the bill dies. It does not make it back to another round of floor voting. And then we move on. So the committee of conference that will go through a series of bills to do this. And usually there's only a few controversial bills that, maybe the House worked really hard to make these changes, and then the Senate changed it, and they're no longer happy with the intent of the bill. These things can happen. It's sort of like what happens in one legislative body can differ than the other. So once you go through the committee of conference and they've decided that here's my selection of bills, they will then be enrolled. Enrolled means they kind of go through this final checks and balance process. So any bill that made it through, that were concurred, automatically go to the enrolled bill process. And those that make it through the committee of conference then also make it through to the enrolled bill process. So once we get to that, there is a committee on rules and enrolled bills, and they do a final review, and they're really looking for any clerical errors or errors that impact the form, that are formal imperfections. Any changes because of these little minor details are done as an amendment, but no further content changes can be made. And so that once that process is complete, and that can take several months. An enrolled bill could be enrolled in, May, June, and it may be August before it actually makes it to the governor's desk. It could be July. You just don't know what this process takes. The Secretary of State presents those bills, usually in groups, to the governor. And the governor then has the opportunity, has 5 days to make a decision what he is going to do with those bills. And now in the process, you as a citizen could actually reach out to the governor during this time. If you know there's a bill that you've been following and it's, you want him to know that you want him to sign that bill into law, you can call him and you can email him and let him know that you want him to support HB 600. That's would be the example that we've been talking about this evening. He could also say that, no, I don't support this bill. I'm going to veto it. And he does, he does a veto. And sometimes the governor might not support a bill and veto it and provide an explanation. And he might just explain why he's not going to sign the bill into law. Another option is that he could just let it sit. And if the legislature is still in session and he doesn't, and 5 days goes by, the bill becomes law without signature. So that is another way to do it. However, if he doesn't sign it and the legislature is out of session, it becomes a pocket veto. It's sort of another way of killing the bill, and it's out and it's done. But if he vetoes it, any bills that have been vetoed have the opportunity to have a veto override, and both bodies, legislative bodies, the Senate and the House, will get together at a later time, usually around October, for what is called Veto Day, and they go through the list of bills and they vote. But in this case, it's not just a majority, it has to be a 2/3 majority to overrule a veto and have that bill become law without signature. Any bill that the governor signs into law or becomes law without signature goes into effect based on the language that is provided in the bill originally. And that can be anywhere from 90 days to the new calendar year, or, it depends on how the bill is actually written. So that's the process for how a bill becomes a law. It's a very intense time period from January to the end of June, especially in a budget year, because then the new fiscal year will start and they need a budget. And so those bills, usually also in a budget year, it's HB 1, which is the budget, and HB 2, which is sort of what they call the trailer bill. And a lot of things can be added on to that bill, but it might be some more financial components to it. So those are the most important bills to keep the state of New Hampshire moving forward. And in our case, last year, we had some bills that had to do with Medicaid rates that were impacted by HB 1. And we also had a bill that allowed for, which passed into law. It took only 1 year to go through the process. Not every bill starts in a given year and is signed into law at the end of a session. Sometimes it can take years for a bill with little, to have to keep going back and forth, making slight changes or getting more support as to get a bill signed into a law. That is the process for how a bill becomes law. And what I wanted to cover in this first session. I would like to thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me, mstjohn@northernhs.org, or you can call me at 603-213-1225. And join us next week as we do a walkthrough step-by-step of the General Court website and their YouTube channel and other tools that are helpful to an advocate. Thank you. And I appreciate your time this evening.